Hello and welcome to a look at Airborne Ranger for the Amiga, a game that was developed, designed, and released by Microprose. Now, because I've already covered the Commodore 64 version of this game, I'm going to be somewhat brief in this particular part of the video and mainly focus on the differences between the two versions. The background scenario is that you are an Airborne Ranger who's getting thrown down behind enemy lines and have to complete various different missions. Anything from stealing a codebook to create a diversion, which is likely the toughest mission in the entire game. And the various missions have various parameters that you have to adhere to. Some of them you can and should go completely bonkers with your weapons use, and other missions requires that you are as silent as possible and ideally not detected. Once you're given your mission, you are sent to the outfit screen, which is something that is unique for the Amiga version, where you can define what kind of equipment you want to take with you. The equipment is limited by how much weight you can store into one of the bags, and the different items have various different weights attached to them. But not only do you have that restriction, you also have the overall restriction of the Ranger only being able to carry so many of each item. It's not something that you'll make use of often, but it can be beneficial from time to time to have access to extra medikits and things like that. Then, of course, you start your mission by having the Osprey aircraft dropping your supply pods, and you want to make sure they land on flat ground. If they land on anything that resembles an obstacle, whether it is a barbed wire, minefield, or an enemy installation, that pod will be lost even. So it is something to be mindful of. Reaching the bottom of the map, you will be encouraged to jump out of the plane, and then you will glide down using a parafoil. And obviously you'll have to make sure that you are landing in a safe location, which again means you don't want to land in a minefield and you don't want to land on walls or on stones, because that can incur wounds. A minefield will kill you outright, but once you have landed, you should check your map to get a feel for the different locations of installations such as machine gun nests and bunkers, and of course your target objective. Then it's time to plan a route and work your way towards your objective, adhering to whatever parameters are given. Something that I didn't do in the Commodore 64 version that I probably should do in this particular version. The same information is available on the map screen on the Commodore 64 version, which is your stamina meter, bottom left. If it fills out completely, you can no longer sprint. Next to that, you have a timer, which is the mission timer. If you should run out of time, the Osprey aircraft will leave the combat zone because it can't hover over the combat area for too long. Underneath that, you have an indicator showing your wounds. You can tolerate 2 wounds because the third one will knock you out or kill you. And you can counteract a wound by using a medikit. 1 medikit per 1 wound. Let's go over the technical side of things. Graphically, you could say that this looks a bit more clean than the Commodore 64 version, but I also find that it moves slightly slower than the Commodore 64 version for whatever reason. I don't know whether I should connect it to the graphical side of things. I probably should. Enemy soldiers. There is a difference in their location from when they are standing up and lying down, which means, of course, that when you have to be quiet and only do silent takedowns, it can be incredibly obnoxious trying to actually hit your target. The title tune is a re-rendition thing of the Commodore 64 version's title tune, and it's a bit more funky and a bit more hip, but personally, I can take it or leave it. Sound effects wise, it generally sounds a bit like Microprose has lifted the sound effects used in the Commodore 64 version and transferred to the Amiga version, with two exceptions. First and foremost, when you blow something up, it sounds more like an artillery strike than a hand grenade being thrown. And the footsteps, which I was harping on about in the Commodore 64 version, and the main reason I was doing that was because they are missing in this particular version. The Amiga, of course, being a fully stereo capable computer, it would have been ideal to have the sound of the footsteps, and ideally, so you could get an idea if the enemy was approaching from the left or from the right. But they have not been included in this particular version, and that means that when you are on stealth missions, it becomes incredibly obnoxious because 9 out of 10 times you will not detect an enemy before they're right on top of you. At a foundation level, it is the same game, but personally, I think the Commodore 64 version plays and feels much, much better than the 16-bit variation of it. But let us head on to the next game in this video. And now it's time for a look at Gunship for the Amiga, a game that was also designed, developed, and released by Microprose. Gunship is an Apache helicopter simulator. And of course, the Apache being a gunship, you can likely imagine that the missions you are given usually involves flying out and blowing something up without getting yourself blown out of the sky, and return and being told how amazing you are at doing what you are doing. When you start the game, the first thing you need to do is to create a pilot. And once that is done, you can define what challenge level you want to try out. First and foremost, you have various different theaters of operations that you can choose from, which each has a certain difficulty assigned to them. Then you have to select mission types. Normal missions, which are missions that are given to you and you are expected to fly out, complete your mission, and come back, ideally in one piece. Then you have voluntary missions, which are significantly more dangerous than just normal missions, but of course, it gives you a chance to score some brownie points with the promotion review board because you are putting yourself at risk. And then you have voluntary hazardous missions. The in-game description is just a ticket for the gung-ho superhero who doesn't care about details like survival. You can imagine that those missions are the type of missions that no one in their right mind would want to do. But if you should do them and complete them and return home to tell the tale, you will be impressing the review board significantly more than any other mission type, and continuously flying voluntary hazardous missions will likely propel you through the ranks relatively quickly. Then, of course, you have realism levels, realistic flight or simplified flight, simplified flight, it's difficult to say, crashes, whether you can crash or not, of course, wind conditions, which can have an impact on the weight the helicopter can carry, and then the quality of the troops you're fighting against. First line or front line, of course, have the best equipment and the most experience, and the third line are the reserves that are only deployed in utmost necessity, more so than anything else. Then it's time to arm your helicopter, and as I was saying before, depending on the weather conditions, you may be forced to lower how much you can carry. On a personal level, I always want to carry 8 Hellfires and 38 fold and fin arrow rockets, and if necessary, I would decrease the ammunition for the 30mm chain gun in order to carry the extra missiles. That is a personal thing. You don't have to follow suit, of course. Then it's time to load in the mission, and once you are in the mission, you should be checking the map, because it will indicate where your primary and secondary targets are located. There's a cursor you can move around, and by default it is placed on top of what is considered to be your primary target, and your onboard guidance systems will indicate which direction you need to fly to reach the point the cursor is pointing at, which of course means that if you accidentally move the cursor around, you can be directed to fly to the middle of nowhere. Because of course this is supposed to be an overview kind of thing, video, I don't want to go too much into details, but I will give you a few pointers towards getting the helicopter off the ground. 1 and 2 will engage the engines, and once they have revved up, you can hit the 3 key to engage the rotor and wait for that to reach its top speed. Then you use F1, 2, 3 and 4 to increase or decrease the collective. And I accidentally said in the Commodore 64 version video that increasing the collective caused the rotor to spin faster, which is complete and utter garbage. It changes the angle of the rotor blades, so because of the change in angle, the rotor blades will cut through the air at a certain angle, and that will increase or decrease the amount of lift the helicopter is producing. From a technical point of view, if I was to release this part of the video as a standalone video, I would likely have used the phrasing carbon copy central on the thumbnail, because if you look at the Commodore 64 version and the Amiga version from a graphical and for that matter from a sound point of view, they are very, very close to being identical. The main difference for the Amiga version is the fact that the vector graphics are filled, which they aren't on the Commodore 64 version, but specifically sound effects basically sounds identical to the Commodore 64 version, which is something that you may find more or less disappointing. On an Amiga 500, this game plays slightly smoother than the Commodore 64 version, but not by much. And no, that is not a knock against the Commodore 64. The fact that Microprose even considered making a combat simulator on 1 MHz and 64K memory is incredible by itself, and it was a miracle that they could pull it off, and pull it off as well as they did. But basically the same game with similar graphics and the same sound effects. You could ask yourself whether it is impressive on the Amiga, especially considering the fact that the version was released 3 years later. I don't know why the team behind this version didn't do more to beef the version up. Maybe they wanted to stay true to the original material and didn't want to deviate too much. Or maybe even at this point, Microprose already had plans of making Gunship 2000, and the team behind the Amiga version didn't want to intrude on the technical excellence that that game turned out to be. Whatever the case, Gunship for the Amiga is 99% the same as the Commodore 64 version, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because I like the Commodore 64 version of Gunship, and the Amiga version, having access to the mouse that makes navigating menus and things like that somewhat snappier, means that I'm perfectly happy with the version being what it is. But I will say that if you want to have the best experience, you should run this game on a 1200 or 14 megahertz chip. That makes the gameplay incredibly smooth and almost makes the simulator play like an action game. But what you don't want to do is increase the speed to 30, 40, or 50 megahertz, because then you reach a speed where the game becomes unplayable because you get knocked out of the sky before you even realize what's going on. Which I suppose can be fun in its own way. Nothing much more to say, so thanks for watching. Take care. See you next time. Bye bye for now.